Hello and welcome to our weekly update for the week ending September 6th. Jerry, what's going on at the legislature?
Well, this week they're not in town, but they are going to be back next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
All right.
Right now, there's nothing on the calendar to let us know what they will be addressing, but we have heard, and I think you mentioned it last week, and I don't call it rumors, but hopefully reliable resources, people saying what they may be looking at. Some of it would be the budget adjustments because they still hadn't passed the budget adjustments that typically happen during the short session, with a few small exceptions. And one of the things that's part of it that you've heard us refer to many times, the opportunity scholarship funding, the additional funding. What may happen, because right now this session's about to run out. And of course, nobody knows the outcome of the elections that we're looking at. Right now, there is a supermajority for the Republicans in the House and Senate. So for them to pass things that might get vetoed either this year or following this would be the time. So if they pass it next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, some budget items maybe like opportunity scholarships, there will be time for a veto to happen and for them to come back before the end of the session to override the veto. So that's kind of the news that we're anticipating for next week, is again for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But actually this week, Adamo, I know you were following part of state government yourself.
Yeah, that's right. So yesterday and today was the State Board of Education's meeting for September. And a few things happened of note that you might be interested in knowing, and our viewers out there. One is this is where they came out with a report on how last year did. So what we call the school report cards, proficiency, performance, attendance, graduation rates. All of this information is now announced in public from the 2023-24 school year. We have seen growth. They are moving in the right direction in most areas. Unfortunately, they're still proud to be getting almost back to where they were before the pandemic. So we're still just catching up to where we were. And even that would be behind. Now, fortunately, they recognize this. The state superintendent, Kathy Truitt, as well as multiple state board members acknowledged that while we're seeing improvement, we are still way far from where we want to be. In some areas below 50% proficiency, and some just above. Obviously, we would like to see that way above 50% proficiency in things like reading, writing, math, science, biology, as an example of science, but it has a specific category. So again, we're seeing growth, but we're not at all where we want to be. We'll put a link with the email when this goes out with the video. There's a dashboard that they have that has data on all of those three things. You can look up your specific district, your specific school. So that's good information. Another interesting thing, particularly with, as you've seen with our updates on sports betting and other issues with monetizing sports in this state, another issue popped up just this meeting. All of a sudden, they're passing rules related to high school students' name, image, and likeness, often referred to as NIL. So if you see NIL, that's not a misspelling of the NHL. It's a different thing. So it's name, image, and likeness. So this is ways for high school students to get paid for doing speaking events or other off-the-field things. Now, the way they've proposed the policy, on-field would not be allowed. They wouldn't be able to do promotional things on the field with their team. So there would be limitations. Now, this comes from a bill the legislature passed in October that mandated that the state board pass policy related to name, image, and likeness. So they were required to pass something, but how that came out and then all of a sudden it's just dropped on in this form, they did approve it, so it is going to public review. So what that means is in October, and we will send you a reminder, in October, public comment will be open on this policy. Watching the state board yesterday and today, there's a lot of mixed sentiment on how they feel about this in general, how they feel about the specific elements of the proposal in terms of how the money is handled, how it's reported on, what happens with it, who it can apply to, sponsorships for schools versus individuals. So all of this is at play with the various board members. So the more parents like you that respond in October and November, the more they'll get that feedback and be able to take that into account in January when they go to potentially actually adopt this policy or potentially significantly change it. So that will be coming in January, but also in October and November, something else small happening.
Yeah, we will. Obviously, we've been talking about the upcoming elections. And before we move into that, though, I want to mention, y'all typically hear us talking about legislative policy decisions that are being made. As Adamo shared, we do also follow things like the State Board of Education. They're obviously related. And again, we see them as opportunities to work together, helping you be informed, to encourage each other about involvement, to encourage these, in this case, appointed members of the State Board of Education as they're getting ready to make decisions to hear from all of us around the state. So thank you for your interest in all that you follow and work together with us on. But with the upcoming election, we saw over 20 years ago the need, even though we were still then and still now mainly focused on policy, we realized it's important who's elected to office. And we engage in that in a nonpartisan way. To give you there's a piece of news this week. Just because a lawsuit's filed doesn't mean something has changed. But there is an important lawsuit that was filed by the National Religious Broadcasters, two churches, and another group called Intercessors for America. And what they're saying is there's a current law that you may have heard about. There's a lot of misinformation about, but it's really a very clear law that passed in the 1950s related to how nonprofits like ourselves, like most churches, are organized as 501c3 organizations. What the IRS, the language is, says may not, this 501c3 nonprofit organizations, churches, may not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. So that's the restriction. That's it. It's that simple. It's the other side of the picture is, what does that mean you can do? Well, churches, organizations like ours can talk about issues with no limit. You can engage in a nonpartisan way in elections, which is what our nonpartisan voter guide is about. We put the questions out there. We don't encourage people to vote one way or the other. We don't comment on it. We don't grade the candidates. We just say, here is a resource that allows people to see where the candidates stand on various issues. One thing I want to mention, with this lawsuit, just because a lot of lawsuits get filed and don't really go anywhere. Alliance Defending Freedom has been working on this issue for years, and this is what these organizations are saying. By having this prohibition that says you can't engage in political campaign activity for or against candidates, you're limiting free speech and you're limiting religious freedom. Those are the arguments that are being made. Whether or not that'll proceed, we don't know. But in the meantime, that's why we continue to produce a nonpartisan voter guide. We review it ourselves legally. We have other people look at it legally to make sure it is neutral, doesn't say vote for or against anybody. And because of that, churches can put our voter guides out, which is where a large percentage of our voter guides are distributed through churches. I mean, over the years, each election cycle, hundreds of thousands across the state. And that's why we're getting ready to send out a notice, and we actually will have a link at the bottom of this email telling you where you can go to pre-order voter guides. We'll have an email come out for those of you who are on our mailing list before too long that will let you know. Again, it'll be another reminder here. You can sign up, pre-order voter guides. Also to mention, if you're on our mailing list, you will receive a paper copy of the voter guide when it comes out, as well as an email notice where you can link into the online version of that. So we encourage you to please work together with us to make this resource available. Sometimes churches will go, and I don't want to get too far afield, but I think this is helpful to know. Every election cycle, this particular law that's being challenged comes up. And there are organizations that send out very misleading interpretations of it and say, churches, if you say anything about the upcoming election, you could lose your tax exempt status. That hasn't ever, I think there's one example where, and it wasn't even a church, and it was because they did engage in activity for or against a candidate. So just to let your churches know, if they ever have a conversation, we're going to have a link at the bottom of this to the IRS publication. They have one it's a short one-pager basically called Charities, Churches, and Politics. But it links to a longer revenue ruling, which is, I think it's only 12, 14 pages, that gives over 20 examples showing you this is what churches and nonprofits can do. And it's a whole lot. So please join us in encouraging Christians. And I know we say it often, but I think I remind myself, it's part of how we can love our neighbors, to be engaged, involved with the issues that are being considered, because those issues are going to affect countless people's lives across the state. And now we have an opportunity as far as who we elect. That's another example, loving our neighbors, to care about who's going to be elected into office. So we appreciate your working together with us. We're going to have those links, as I say, in this one and a follow-up email.
And as you would have seen in a recent email from us, we also recently partnered with Christians Engaged. That is another resource out there to help you get plugged in, get the vote out, get Christians engaged in our political civic life, because that is part of how we love our neighbor. That is part of how we make a culture that supports our faith, that supports virtue, that supports raising children in a way that honors God and allows families to flourish. So we look forward to educating you on these, getting you plugged into that, and please help us connect with your neighbors and your church communities, whether with us directly or just with them being informed and engaged and prepared to help shape this country and this state in a way that honors God, helps families flourish, and protects religious freedom. We thank you for your support, your partnership, your prayers, and all you do to make this state so great alongside us. Thank you. God bless.